The beaches of Dunkirk in late May 1940 were a place of chaos. Smoke, fear, and hope mingled together in the salty air. Over 400,000 Allied soldiers were trapped between the advancing German panzer divisions and the cold waters of the English Channel. But amid the desperate scramble for survival, something else was unfolding. A quiet evacuation within the evacuation, unseen by most and unrecorded in official logs. At dawn on May 27th, the first shells landed near the East Mole, a long wooden pier stretching into the sea, where British destroyers took on men as fast as possible. The operation had been given the code name Operation Dynamo, directed from a bunker beneath Dover Castle. Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay orchestrated what would become one of the most remarkable rescue efforts in military history. But beneath the orderly chaos, certain names, certain officers began to vanish from the lists. Their embarkation points, ships, and destinations were untraceable. For men like Signalman Arthur Clark, stationed aboard HMS Icarus, the confusion was unbearable. "We saw men climbing aboard who weren't in uniform," Clark later wrote in his journal. "No insignia, no badges, just a quiet authority. They spoke to the officers, and then they were gone." Some men were simply gone. The human struggle at Dunkirk was monumental. Soldiers of the British Expeditionary Force, BF, men from the 2nd Battalion, Royal Norfolk Regiment, and the Durham Light Infantry, fought street by street in the ruins of Dunkirk town. German artillery pounded the port relentlessly, while Stuka dive bombers screamed overhead, sending waves of panic through the lines. Water was scarce, ammunition low, and the beaches littered with wreckage. Men crouched behind burned-out trucks, praying their turn to board a rescue ship would come before the Luftwaffe returned. In this chaos, Royal Navy logbooks began to show small anomalies. Some launches were unmarked, others listed incorrect departure times. The HMS Basilisk reported taking on special passengers under the authority of naval intelligence. No names, no ranks, just initials. PGS repeated across several pages. Decades later, historians would wonder, could this have referred to Priority Group Sigma, a rumored evacuation group never acknowledged by the War Office? The struggle for command and control was as much bureaucratic as physical. Orders shifted hourly, and communication between ground commanders and naval staff often broke down completely. Captain William Tennant, the senior naval officer at Dunkirk, had to make split-second decisions about who boarded and when. "We had no time to question," he later recalled, "only to act and pray it was the right choice." Still, certain individuals seemed to move freely across the beachhead, unimpeded by rank or regulation. Witnesses described men wearing standard khaki tunics, but carrying attaché cases instead of rifles. They boarded smaller, unmarked vessels that avoided the main rescue routes, heading not west toward Dover, but east toward unknown destinations. A fragment of a diary, recovered years later from the personal effects of a naval officer, offered a chilling note dated May 30th. Asterisk, East Mole secured. Convoy at 0400. Orders from London. Silent departure. Not to be recorded. Asterisk, the historical insight here is clear. In war, the record is written not just by victors, but by survivors, and some records are deliberately left unwritten. For modern listeners, it's a reminder of how even the most documented events in history can hold hidden layers, unspoken motives, and silenced witnesses. By June 2nd, the evacuation neared its end. Over 338,000 Allied troops had been rescued, defying Churchill's own grim expectations. The Prime Minister called it a miracle of deliverance. But within the celebrations, questions lingered. A handful of officers listed as missing presumed captured had never faced German hands. Their families received no letters, no dog tags, no graves. The final pages of Signalman Clark's journal are smeared with water damage, perhaps from the Channel spray. But one line remains legible, a haunting reflection from a young man who saw too much. Asterisk, they said we all made it home, but not all of us did, and not all of us were meant to. Asterisk, as the ships pulled away from the burning coastline and the last of Dunkirk faded into the haze, a different story was already sinking beneath the waves. A story of men who disappeared not by accident, but by design. And in the official records of Operation Dynamo, their names would never appear. Next time, we follow the paper trail left behind, fragments of logs, coded orders, and the first whispers of Priority Group Sigma, the secret within the evacuation that history tried to forget. While the world remembers Dunkirk as a story of courage and survival, few know that hidden within Operation Dynamo was another mission, one shrouded in secrecy and silence. Officially, it never existed. Yet buried in the chaos were orders that pointed to something far more controlled than the panic of retreat. A clandestine evacuation orchestrated not by the Royal Navy, but by Britain's shadow warriors, the early intelligence network that would become MI6 and the Special Operations Executive. The groundwork for this mystery began days before the evacuation. As German panzers closed in on Calais and the BEF's retreat funneled into the narrow coastal corridor around Dunkirk, London's intelligence offices buzzed with coded telegrams. One message, sent on May 25th, carried the highest classification, most secret Dynamo variant, and was addressed to Naval Intelligence, Dover Command. The content was short, cryptic, asterisk, retrieve personnel and materials designated Group Sigma. Priority absolute. No documentation. Asterisk, among the men on the beaches were more than infantry. Embedded within the ranks of the BEF were specialists, radio engineers, cipher clerks, linguists, and field analysts. Many had been detached from Section D, the covert sabotage branch of MI6. Their mission before Dunkirk was to destroy communications and intelligence assets across Belgium and northern France to keep them from German hands. But as the retreat quickened, these operatives carried with them more than rifles. They carried codebooks, encryption devices, and fragments of top-secret research, including early work on signals interception that would later feed into Bletchley Park's Ultra program. The pain and struggle of those final days were unlike any other. Officers tried to maintain order as tens of thousands pressed toward the beaches. Among the confusion, coded lists circulated, handwritten sheets marked with initials, not names. According to one Royal Signal sergeant, there were men who didn't queue. They showed a paper, nodded to a naval officer, and were gone. No one questioned it. Not at Dunkirk, not in the weeks that followed. As the evacuation intensified, communications broke down. German artillery from the 18th Infantry Division hammered the port relentlessly. The East Mole, the lifeline of Operation Dynamo, was hit repeatedly, yet convoys continued. In this storm of fire, a small group of officers was quietly extracted under orders from an unregistered ship's captain. His vessel, the HMS Valorous, was officially recorded as carrying ammunition and stores. Yet its manifest, discovered decades later in an archive misfiled under Coastal Patrol records, contained one puzzling entry. Asterisk, supplementary cargo, Sigma, 12. Asterisk, a diary entry from a young officer named Lieutenant Henry Rhodes, recovered from his family estate in Kent, offers a first-hand glimpse into the confusion. Asterisk, received strange orders from command, not to speak to anyone, told to proceed to pier at 0300. Small craft, unmarked, civilians among them. Was this an evacuation or an extraction? Asterisk, historical records confirm that the Special Operations Executive, SOE, was not officially formed until July 1940, a month after Dunkirk. Yet several of its founding members had already been operating under Section D, planting the seeds for what would become Britain's covert war in Europe. Some historians now believe that the so-called Priority Group Sigma consisted of these pre-SOE operatives, evacuated before the formal creation of the organization. Their disappearance from troop rosters may have been intentional, a move to erase their existence before launching secret missions into occupied territory. The wisdom buried in these documents reveals how thin the line was between survival and secrecy. Intelligence officer Charles Hambro once wrote, "In retreat, our greatest weapon was not force, but silence." For those involved in the secret evacuation, silence was both duty and curse. Modern analysts have drawn a striking parallel. Just as intelligence agencies today scrub digital footprints, wartime operatives scrubbed human ones. The men of Group Sigma were effectively erased from history, sacrificed on paper so they could live in shadow. By the first days of June 1940, Dunkirk was nearly empty. The beaches were strewn with helmets and burned-out vehicles, the sea littered with the wrecks of small boats. But in a locked room inside Dover Castle, Vice Admiral Ramsay reportedly received a short message from a secure channel, Sigma Secure. Package complete. No record of this transmission exists in official naval logs, yet fragments of the same phrase appear in post-war intelligence correspondence. As the last Allied ship left the French coast on June 4th, the visible part of Operation Dynamo had ended. But beneath its success lay a quieter story, one that didn't fit into speeches or headlines. The mystery of Priority Group Sigma had only begun to surface. Next, we follow eyewitness account from pilots and soldiers who saw a convoy heading east, away from the main rescue route, toward Malles-les-Bains, and the unknown fate of those aboard. By the third week of May 1940, Dunkirk was not just a battlefield, it was a logistical nightmare. Yet even as British destroyers and little ships ferried troops west toward Dover, a small convoy of vessels was seen heading east, against orders, into the darkness. For decades, this odd movement remained a footnote in after-action reports, dismissed as navigational confusion. But new evidence suggests it was anything but accidental. The operation centered on Malles-les-Bains, a small seaside resort east of Dunkirk's main harbor. Intelligence archives later hinted that this sector was used for selective embarkations, under the cover of smoke screens laid by the Royal Navy. Local French fishermen recalled seeing small craft, motor launches and converted trawlers, moving in near silence, lights extinguished, under the cover of pre-dawn haze. They carried not hundreds of troops, but handfuls of men, and at least one crate marked Sint/1939, a designation linked to the pre-war Cipher Intelligence Service. The pain of the moment was palpable. While ordinary soldiers waded waist-deep in cold surf for hours, German artillery shelled the sands without mercy. Private Harold Benton of the 1st Grenadier Guards later described it in his letters. Asterisk, you could smell the cordite and the oil. The sea was on fire, the sky full of planes. And still, there were men who seemed calm, waiting for something else entirely. Asterisk Benton noticed one such group, 5 men, standing apart from the rest, each with a canvas satchel slung across his shoulder. He watched as they were ushered aboard a small naval launch by an officer he didn't recognize. At that same moment, higher up the chain of command, Royal Air Force pilots flying sorties over the Dunkirk perimeter began noticing unusual signals traffic. Squadron leader Dennis Langham, piloting a Bristol Blenheim bomber, recalled intercepting coded Morse transmissions on a non-standard frequency emanating from the coast near Malles-les-Bains. It wasn't German, he said later. Too clean, too fast, our own people, but running under a shadow net. The Royal Navy destroyer HMS Havant recorded a mysterious order logged at 0200 hours on May 31st. Detach secondary craft to Sigma route, priority. The entry was later crossed out in red pencil, with the words, "Not to be discussed," written beside it. Naval historians who examined the log decades later were unable to find any corroborating entries for what Sigma route meant. The fog of war gave cover to confusion, but confusion is often the best disguise for intent. Intelligence officers operating in France before the German advance had maintained networks of agents, codenamed Phalanx, Crossbow, and Sigma. Their mission was to collect information on German airfields and troop movements. As the Wehrmacht swept through Belgium, these agents were trapped. Retrieving them, and the intelligence they carried, would have been a top priority. A quote from the post-war memoirs of Rear Admiral Roger Keyes, one of the founders of Britain's early special operations efforts, offers chilling context. Asterisk, at Dunkirk, we did not only rescue soldiers. We rescued minds. Men who held the war's future in their heads. Asterisk, modern historians now view this eastbound convoy as a likely intelligence retrieval mission. The presence of unmarked personnel, the use of non-standard frequencies, and the selective embarkations all align with wartime patterns of clandestine operations. For the men involved, it was a moral paradox. While thousands died or waited in terror, a few were spirited away in silence. Was it favoritism or strategy? Those on the ground could not have known. For them, Dunkirk was a nightmare of waiting and watching. They just disappeared, One sergeant said later. We thought they'd gone mad, walking toward the wrong end of the beach. But the Germans never got them, nor did we. What became of those boats remains uncertain. None of the small craft seen heading east were ever reported arriving in Dover or Ramsgate. The official explanation was that they had been sunk by German E-boats in the channel. Yet, no wreckage matching their description was ever found. By nightfall on June 1st, the beaches were nearly empty, save for the dead and the dying. And somewhere beyond the horizon, in the direction no one was supposed to go, a small flotilla vanished, taking with it the truth of Priority Group Sigma. In the next chapter, we move beyond the beaches and into the archives, where names erased from Dunkirk reappear in unexpected places, at Bletchley Park, in the files of the early SOE, and in one cryptic memo signed Only C. After the last ships left Dunkirk, Britain celebrated what Churchill called a miracle of deliverance. But for a handful of intelligence officers and archivists, the miracle was tainted by questions. Weeks after the evacuation, as names were tallied and units reformed, several officers remained unaccounted for. Men not captured, not killed, simply erased. And when a few of their service numbers resurfaced in classified documents months later, they were attached to new designations, new cover identities, and secret units that didn't yet officially exist. It began at Bletchley Park, the quiet estate in Buckinghamshire that had just become Britain's new nerve center for code-breaking. In early July 1940, Commander Alastair Denniston, head of the Government Code and Cipher School, GC and CS, received a sealed report from the War Office marked "From Dunkirk, Sigma personnel." Inside were short dossiers. No photographs, no personal histories, just initials and fields of expertise. Among them, CM, Signals Cryptanalysis, RR, Wireless Interception, and LF, French Liaison Dissection. At the same time, in London's Broadway buildings, the home of MI6, Secret Intelligence Service, a new branch called Section D was quietly dissolved. Its assets were folded into what would soon become the Special Operations Executive SOE, designed to set Europe ablaze, in Churchill's words. Yet Section D's final report contained one striking omission: a list of field officers marked as unaccounted for after Operation Dynamo. In the margin, someone had written, in faint pencil, "Recovered, Sigma line." Pain and secrecy often go hand in hand. For the families of the missing, the silence was devastating. Wives received form letters stating, "Missing in action, presumed captured." Yet no German POW record ever listed these men. For the officers who had known them, the secrecy was frustrating, but revealing. Major Peter Fleming, brother of Ian Fleming, who would later create James Bond, was involved in early intelligence coordination and noted in a post-war interview, "Some men from Dunkirk did not return to barracks because they had no barracks to return to." One recently declassified War Cabinet memo dated June 12, 1940, sheds more light on this mystery. It reads, "Extraction of intelligence personnel successful. Recommend reallocation under Special Duties Branch. Priority remains absolute. Future operations in occupied France to rely on same network, same protocol, Sigma classification retained." The memo was signed only with a single letter, C. Most historians believe this refers to Stuart Menzies, the legendary head of MI6. The wisdom of these actions, while morally murky, was strategically sound. The intelligence these men carried, French resistance contacts, German cipher patterns, and signals intercepts, would later prove vital to Britain's code-breaking success. The ultra-secret, as it became known, depended on information retrieved and preserved by these early intelligence evacuations. The Operation Silence ensured that those resources never fell into Nazi hands. For today's viewer, the relevance is striking. We live in an age where information itself is a battlefield. The idea that lives were quietly rewritten or erased to protect secrets underscores a timeless truth. In war, truth itself is often a casualty. Still, even the most disciplined secrecy leaves traces. In the 1970s, a historian named Dr. Malcolm Spencer gained access to restricted naval archives at Kew. There, in a dusty file labeled "Obsolete Dunkirk Communications," he discovered a memo marked asterisk, Section D. Final report. Asterisk attached was a single page of typed notes and an intriguing line. Asterisk, contact maintained. Sigma assets redeployed. Paris operation scheduled Q1 1941. Asterisk, it implied that some of the missing officers were later inserted back into occupied France, perhaps under new names, serving in clandestine resistance coordination. None ever reappeared in public records, and not one family received official confirmation of survival. The emotional cost of such operations is impossible to measure. Families mourned, comrades wondered, yet those within the intelligence community knew. The men who disappeared from Dunkirk had, in a sense, been reborn into shadow. As one anonymous memo from Bletchley Park put it bluntly, asterisk, they were not lost. They were reassigned to history's blank pages. Asterisk next, we turn to one of those blank pages, the story of the SS Maidstone, a ship rumored to have carried Sigma operatives from Dunkirk and vanished without a trace. Its disappearance would deepen the mystery and cement the legend of the operation no one was ever meant to know existed. In the official history of Operation Dynamo, the Royal Navy destroyers, trawlers, and private boats that made the perilous channel crossing are all accounted for, except one. The SS Maidstone, a converted merchant vessel pressed into evacuation duty, left Dunkirk in the early hours of June 1st, 1940. She was never seen again. No distress signal, no wreckage, no survivors. Her name appears only once in naval traffic reports before being struck through in red ink. The note beside it reads simply, asterisk, lost enemy action. File closed. Asterisk, but some who were there insist the story doesn't end there. Among them was Lieutenant Thomas Avery of the Royal Navy Reserve, who served aboard HMS Worcester, one of the ships coordinating evacuation traffic. In his post-war interviews, Avery recalled the Maidstone's final radio transmission, a clipped message on an auxiliary frequency. Convoy secure. Adjusting course. East by southeast. No one could explain why she was heading away from the main evacuation route toward the darker waters near Calais. Pain and confusion defined those last hours at Dunkirk. Destroyers were overloaded, small craft capsized, and the Luftwaffe bombed without mercy. Yet, according to Avery and others, the Maidstone had been under special orders. Her manifest was sealed, her passengers listed as non-military personnel. Later intelligence debriefs hinted that these passengers were neither civilians nor soldiers, but something in between. A log entry from HMS Esk on June 1st records, asterisk, Maidstone detached from formation. Signal lights observed. No return acknowledgement. Asterisk 2 hours later, German aircraft attacked the main evacuation corridor. But the Maidstone's route, farther east, was untouched. She vanished from radar and from history. Years later, a French fisherman named Jean Dubois told a BBC documentary team he saw a gray ship burning off the coast of Gravelines around that same time. But his story conflicted with military records, which reported no engagement in that sector. More strangely, Dubois claimed that days later, men in plain clothes, British, not German, arrived in the area asking questions and confiscating his logbook. The human element of this story deepens the mystery. Among the Maidstone's supposed passengers was Major Leonard Fielding, a communications expert linked to Bletchley Park's early cipher team. Fielding was officially listed as missing Dunkirk sector. Yet in 1943, his name appeared in an internal SOE document under a new alias, connected to sabotage missions in Vichy, France. The contradiction has never been explained. A later investigation by the Imperial War Museum uncovered an internal Admiralty memo dated July 12, 1940, marked asterisk restricted. Asterisk it read, asterisk subject, SS Maidstone, wreckage not located. Recommend cessation of public inquiry. Intelligence classification remains active. Asterisk the term intelligence classification remains active was unusual, typically reserved for vessels involved in covert or experimental operations. Modern sonar surveys of the English Channel have only deepened the enigma. In 2009, a research team scanning the seabed near Dunkirk found a large metallic anomaly roughly matching the Maidstone's tonnage. But before the site could be examined, Access to that grid section was restricted by the UK Ministry of Defence under maritime security laws. The reason? National interest. For historians, the Maidstone has become a symbol, a vessel swallowed by both sea and secrecy. Theories range from a navigational accident to a deliberate scuttling to protect sensitive equipment or documents. A few even suggest she was intercepted by Allied forces themselves to prevent capture. Yet one fragment stands out. A scrap of radio log recovered from the archives of Dover Command. Dated June 1st, 1940, it contains a final message attributed to the Maidstone. Asterisk cargo intact. Sigma orders fulfilled. Proceeding to final coordinates. Asterisk those coordinates are missing. The log cuts off mid-entry. For those who survived Dunkirk, the loss of one ship among hundreds was hardly remarkable at the time. But for intelligence historians, the Maidstone represents something greater. The point where recorded history fades into deliberate silence. And that silence carried forward for decades. Even today, a portion of the channel sonar data remains classified, its absence forming a gap shaped almost exactly like a ship. In the final chapter, we return to the present, to historians and divers still searching for the Maidstone's wreck, and to the question that lingers 80 years later. Who truly disappeared from Dunkirk, and why were they never meant to be found? 85 years after Dunkirk, the question remains unanswered. Who truly disappeared during Operation Dynamo, and why? As historians and divers continue to probe the wrecks scattered across the English Channel, the SS Maidstone remains missing, a ghost without a grave. Its absence has become a riddle written into the seabed itself. A reminder that even the most well-documented moments in history can still hide their darkest secrets. Modern researchers have not given up. In 2015, a multinational survey team, using deep-water sonar, detected an object near Gravelines consistent with the Maidstone's dimensions. But before they could publish findings, the Ministry of Defense abruptly revoked their permit. The stated reason? Sensitive material on board. The phrase stunned historians. What sensitive material could possibly remain dangerous after 8 decades? The answer, perhaps, lay not in what was lost, but in who was aboard. Recently declassified SOE archives shed partial light. Among the files was an unsigned report labeled Asterisk, After Action, Sigma Operation, June 1940. Asterisk, the summary read, Asterisk, Extraction completed. Personnel transferred. Operation succeeded in preventing enemy access to cryptologic assets. Secondary transport compromised. Presumed total loss. Asterisk, it never named the secondary transport, but its timing aligned perfectly with the Maidstone's disappearance. The implication was chilling. The ship may have been deliberately sacrificed, scuttled under orders to ensure nothing, and no one, fell into German hands. The pain of this possibility lingers even now. Families of the missing officers, men whose names never reappeared, continued writing to the War Office into the 1950s, seeking answers. One widow, Margaret Fielding, wrote, Asterisk, if he died in battle, I can accept that. But if he died in secrecy, what was it all for? Asterisk, the letter was never answered. For decades, the official narrative of Dunkirk left no space for mystery. Yet the fragments of Operation Sigma, the erased logs, the redacted messages, the missing ship, all suggest another layer to that miraculous evacuation. As historian Dr. Malcolm Spencer later remarked in a BBC interview, Asterisk, we speak of Dunkirk as a rescue of men, but it was also the rescue of knowledge, of intelligence, of secrets vital to survival. Asterisk, the wisdom in these revelations lies not just in understanding the past, but in recognizing the cost of secrecy. Britain's victory in the code-breaking war, the cracking of the Enigma and Lorraine ciphers, owed much to the preservation of intelligence that could easily have been lost in France. The men of Group Sigma may have vanished, but their disappearance might have saved countless lives later in the war. To modern audiences, the story of these vanished men reflects something timeless. The quiet sacrifices made not for glory, but for silence. Their erasure ensured the success of intelligence operations that turned the tide of World War II. And yet, history has left them unnamed. Their stories buried beneath layers of classification and sea salt. In 2018, divers working off the Dunkirk coast placed a small plaque on a patch of seabed where the Maidstone might lie. It bears no official emblem, no unit insignia, only an inscription, asterisk, for those who vanished, that others might return. Asterisk, the truth about the secret evacuation from Dunkirk, about Group Sigma and the Maidstone, may never surface. But perhaps that is as intended. As one line from an untraceable intelligence memo once read, asterisk, some disappearances are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be remembered. Asterisk, and so, as the waves wash over the silent coast of Dunkirk, we are left with a haunting echo, not of defeat, nor of victory, but of mystery. A reminder that history, like the sea, keeps its secrets well. 6 chapters finished. Waiting for prompt 3.